Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Crypto Byte. Today is Wednesday, March 16th. Very volatile 24 hours. Bitcoin back above 40K. Lots of movement in the alts as well, but also the equity market. Very volatile here as we start the day, but looking pretty strong. So plenty to talk about. But before we get started, CJ, how are you doing today, my friend?
Doing well, Monty. Yeah, quick rejection right here at like 41K off some critical levels. So looking forward to taking a dive and seeing more in the charts. But one thing that's been quite interesting is Rune or Thorchain, which is actually up about 90 to 100% over the last week or week and a half. So there's a couple reasons behind that, and we'll break that down as well. But definitely a really interesting project in the realm of blockchain interoperability. They really are on the forefront in that sense. So yeah, how you doing?
Yeah, very nice move from Rune. I think that narrative is really taking hold. We talked a lot about how at the end of 2021, the trend was kind of these layer ones gaining a lot of traction. Now lots of people are looking for what sector, what narrative may be the next to gain traction. I think a lot of people are looking at that, blockchain interoperability, and that includes things like Rune, which is showing some tremendous momentum since the start of the month. Very nice volume. So excited to dive into that. But I think first we should start with Bitcoin because it has been, like I said, a very volatile 24 hours here. Still maintaining this upward sloping trend line, CJ. But if we look at the hourly chart, we can really get a sense for the sort of volatility that we've seen over the last 24 hours. And, as you can see here, big move up to, about 41K. We got rejected at about 41.7 or so and, came right back down. And, we had the usual suspects at play from this volatility, including liquidations. And as you can see, this move up was kicked off by a significant amount of shorts being liquidated, about 75 million over the period of just an hour. That propelled us up to the 41K level. But then, of course, we had, people flipping long, and we had longs getting liquidated as well, which kind of pulled us back down. But since then, we've leveled off, saw a brief, another instance of short liquidations, but, now kind of consolidating around this 40K level. So, obviously lots of volatility, much of it on the back of, levered liquidations. But ultimately it's led to Bitcoin regaining that 40K level. Also, it's worth mentioning ETH is looking very strong as well here today. So very interesting market here as we, get through the middle of the week. Any thoughts on what you're seeing with Bitcoin here, CJ, as we enter this Wednesday?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, Monty, very volatile evening. Well, for some, it was evening for us, not everyone across the globe, though. But yeah, quite a bit of volume. A lot of shorts getting squeezed out in this one particular instance. But I don't think it's a whole lot yet, because I don't want to see this turn into a third consecutive lower high. That would just show more weakness in the trend, and I think you're already starting to see that a little bit. With this rejection from the channel of roughly, 41K to 44. I mean, that channel in general has just been very strong resistance. You can see it for the previous time we tested it up at 42 and just got rejected as well recently. So, I'd like to get in that level first before beginning to look for longs, as opposed to just seeing potentially a third consecutive lower high put in. But we'll do some more in-depth analysis, not only on BTC, but also some alts and ETH in our members-only Doge of the Day after this. You can find that in the description with a link in the description below. Yeah, ETH is actually looking a little bit better in the sense that it's closer to kind of creating that higher high as opposed to Bitcoin. But, I would have liked to see them go a little bit higher today, especially with, say, the S&P and NASDAQ up over 1%. They opened, up over 2% this morning. So just not quite like the great strength that we would want to see when the equity market is up this much and oil is down and the DXY is down. But nonetheless, significant to get over 40K here.
Yeah, agreed, CJ. And just quickly, since you mentioned that, what do you make of, the equity markets this morning? We had the Qs opening up pretty big, like you mentioned, and often that results in a bit more risk taking from speculative investors. which we usually see reflected in a move in the alts. Not so much seeing that today, like you said. Not really as strong as a move as you'd expect, given what we're seeing from the traditional equity markets. But that being said, last week we did have the Qs down significantly while Bitcoin was being relatively resilient. So you got to take the good with the bad, I suppose, there.
Yeah, it's not a one-for-one correlation by any means, but they definitely feed off kind of each other's energy, so to speak. One thing that we talked about was how a lot of equity traders, before the market will open, they will actually watch Bitcoin, in the evenings during the Asian session, and kind of use that as a metric to see how the equities might open up, or how the S&P or ARK or the Nasdaq will open up in the following day, because that risk on mentality is still found within Bitcoin, as well as many other tech stocks, and just ARK and the Qs and whatnot, Nasdaq, all that stuff. As for what we're seeing in terms of the Qs and also the S&P, we've had a bullish divergence for quite some time. In other words, higher lows on the RSI and lower lows in price. Now, of course, that can continue for a little bit longer. We could keep going up like this and keep going down, but eventually you probably see a return or some type of surge higher. And then, potentially we get a rejection down to lower levels, and, we have to reassess at that point. But one thing, when, I saw this divergence, it's very interesting because it happened in Bitcoin. Let's get out the replay mode. So if you look at where Bitcoin was in the summer, right, it was creating lower lows in price and lower highs. Yet we had this very interesting bullish divergence on the RSI. And, we kept going down for a little bit, but eventually, price really came back up and had a nice bullish run. And so when you look at that divergence and you kind of consider where the S&P and NASDAQ are right now, they're all kind of showing that same type of bullish divergence on the RSI. So perhaps we get a rally to the midpoint of the range here, especially if there are positive developments around, Ukraine and Russia and whatnot. But that still remains to be seen. Either way, I think that divergence is definitely significant and very impactful for Bitcoin and the Qs if that price action should play out.
Yeah, definitely worth noting, CJ. And one thing that we opened the show with that you mentioned is Thorchain Rune. That's another one that, since the local bottoms has been showing tremendous momentum. Since the start of the month, right at the beginning of March, this thing really just kicked off with some tremendous volume. And that's on the back of a strong narrative. Do you want to talk a little bit more about, Thorchain and Rune?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the start of March, specifically the 1st, the integration with Thorchain Rune to the Terra ecosystem, in other words, Luna and Cosmos, that was complete. And that led to kind of an initial rally of 74%, and was very bullish overall for the ecosystem. If you don't know a whole lot about Rune or Thorchain, they are basically built for blockchain interoperability. They also have synthetic assets, so you can trade, you can pretty much bridge any asset and trade it. So it's really key for that theme of blockchain interoperability that many have talked about. If you look at the Messari yearly reports and just read it, the disclosures in nearly every one of those analysts holds Rune. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But as you can see, a lot of volume coming in this week on the back of that rally following the integration. You can see on that day we had very bullish engulfing candle from $4 all the way to $5.60. And then, that rally has kind of just been followed up. So I would look for the top of this range for potential continuation, unless, we see another bearish engulfing candle here. Either way, I like the fundamentals of Rune going into the next cycle. They had some trouble kind of coming up because they had a couple intermediate hacks, but there has been good development. Thorchain used to be, or is probably the backbone of Shapeshift. If you guys have ever used that decentralized exchange with non-KYC, but also the sudden price increase was likely tied to the release of synthetic assets, which are derivatives of basically BTC and ETH and other assets on the Thorchain blockchain in ThorSwap. And, they've already done about 10 million in volume, which isn't huge or anything, but this development and where it leads going into like the next bullish phase of the market, I think Thorchain is quite interesting because of these themes, because of its ability to kind of play like the meta game of the market. Many people have been talking about blockchain interoperability being a key theme. Typically, that's kind of not always the best because what is obvious typically doesn't happen. I remember a lot of people in 2018, 2019, early on when we were emerging from the bear market, people were saying, security tokens are going to be, the catalyst, kind of like how ICOs were previously. And that's not what we saw. We saw DeFi and NFTs and a lot of things that we couldn't have really predicted. Only few people really predicted them. So we'll see if that kind of plays into that idea with blockchain interoperability. But very interesting with Thor and just the rally it's seen over the past week.
Yeah, very interesting stuff. Thank you for providing some context to that volume because, I mean, that is a staggering spike in volume. And, that's also reflected in a tremendous spike in price as well. So definitely worth keeping your eye on Thor and, Rune. But also another one, CJ, that kind of fits in with that same narrative, hasn't seen as much traction. You mentioned it briefly there, is Atom or Cosmos. A lot of people have been looking at that one as a potential next runner here as Bitcoin dominance starts to turn down. I think that that's definitely a possibility as well. It's seen significant traction. It fits all the bills technically of what we'd like to see in terms of putting in higher lows, showing signs of momentum from the bottom. So those are just a couple to keep on your radar, but we'll give you a few more as well during the Doge of the day. But I think that's all we got for today's Daily Crypto Byte. Thank you guys so much for watching as always. If you guys would like to join CJ and I and the rest of the rebels in the crypto room, you can do so at the link below. And please don't forget to like and subscribe on your way out. It really helps out the channel. But that's all we got for today. We'll see you guys again tomorrow.